Thursday, March 14th, 2024, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today, we're going to look at who really triggered the gilt collapse and the defined benefit pension collapse in the UK in September of 2022. Yes, we're told it was the Liz Truss government and Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget, but I've spoken a little bit about this before, but I've gathered more information and yeah, I've come to the conclusion that it was someone else. Yes, they might have accentuated the crisis, but you'll be surprised who really triggered it. Before I start, though, I like to make probably the most important announcement I've made since I've started this channel, and it's to do with me and my health. Um, for the last couple of years or so, or a year and a half, I've been feeling breathless when I go out and play golf, especially when I have to go uphill. I get tired, and I'm not out of shape. I'm not overweight. At first, I thought it was just, yeah, that I was a little bit out of shape because we were in lockdown for so long. And so I thought that would go away and get back to normal. But it didn't. And I had some tests last year. And unfortunately, but also fortunately, because yeah, it will save my life. I was diagnosed with a congenital heart condition that's gotten worse, of course, over the years, and I didn't know about. And I'm going into surgery tomorrow. I'm leaving today for the hospital, and I'm going to be, yeah, I'm going to be offline for probably about a week, maybe more. Hopefully, not too long. Resting after the surgery tomorrow. Yeah, so I'm being upfront here. Yes, it's a bit scary, but it has to be done, or else, yeah, in a couple of years' time, it would have become very serious. So the surgery is routine, so it shouldn't be a problem. And yeah, just wanted to let you know, I won't be posting from tomorrow onwards until probably late next week. Excuse me. So just wanted to put that out there. Uh, so back to the UK crisis back in 2022. And I remember talking about the fact that the UK government wanted to change the way their tips. It's the UK tips version of tips, which is treasury, inflation protected treasury securities. In the UK, it's called the UK linkers. It's linked to RPI, which is the retail price index. And the UK has been like the UK Treasury and government, they've been pioneers at designing this security. I think they did it back in the 80s. So they started it off and they used RPI, which is the retail price index. But ever since the late 90s, they created something called the CPIH. And that, of course, was created by the Labour government and Gordon Brown through the Office of National Statistics, of course, which is run by the government. And they and why do they do that? Well, because, you know, there's the old saying, lies, damn lies, and statistics. That was former Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli. He was supposed to have said that. So politicians are always trying to take your money, and they do it through inflation, and they fool you into thinking that there's no inflation through by saying that CPI is inflation. So what do they do with the CPI or RPI for that matter? Well, they tinker with it. They change things. So the linkers, UK gilt linkers, they're called linkers. They make up about 20% of all the UK debt that's been issued to the public. So it's a huge market. It's what it does, it protects investors, and especially pension funds, private pension funds that are called defined benefit pension funds that pay out once you retire. They give you a certain amount, a defined amount, hence the name. And they used these linkers, billions and billions, and we're going to come to that in a minute, to protect or to invest these defined benefit pensions. And so here we're going to come to when the government decided that they wanted to change the they wanted to basically default. And I actually made a video about this, that the UK government was defaulting on the gilts, the linkers especially. And why? Well, because of this. If you go back to September 22, when they were talking about this, and you see why in a minute. Background: from March through August 2020, the UK government ran a consultation. I like the way they run consultations. It's just to make it seem like it's something that is good for the public. We're going to consult, make sure it's done right. It's just a euphemism, people. They're just going to change and rob you. That's why they use those words. On the reform of retail price index methodology. The purpose of the consultation was to consider whether the UK should officially move away from retail price index, which historically has been more than 1% higher than the CPI. They tinker with the CPI. And towards the consumer price index, including owner-occupied housing costs. So this CPIH is basically, a measure of prices, or inflation as they call it. That is a lot lower than the RPI. And so here we're coming to the culprits. Who was the Chancellor of the Exchequer? Let's back from March through August 2020. Well, it's easy to see here online. We've got, well, he's Prime Minister now, right? And he wasn't even properly elected as the leader of the Conservative Party. So you could argue he's not a really legitimate Prime Minister. But he was Chancellor of the Exchequer from 13th of February 2020 to July 5th, 2022. And why is that important? Well, that's important because that's when they started this consultation of basically getting rid of RPI and imposing CPI. And that, of course, would basically rip off millions of investors and company schemes that use these linkers. I think there's there's hundreds of billions in the linkers invested through these pension funds, and it's usually just these pension funds that invest in it. It's not something that, Joe Bloggs goes out and buys linkers for his ISA. So, and Chancellor of the Exchequer, of course, is the equivalent of the U.S. Treasury Secretary. So we're going to move forward here to September 2022, and this was on the 1st of September. Court declares change of RPI to CPIH lawful. So, and so that was 1st of September. Keep that date in mind. So this was the court case, and the judge made his decision on, as you can see, 1st of September 2022. On the application of BT Pension Scheme Trustees Limited, Marks and Spencer Pensions Trust Limited, Ford Pension Scheme for Senior Staff Trustees Limited, Ford Salary Pension Fund Trustees Limited, Ford Pension Trust Trustees, Pension Fund Trustees Limited, and UK Statistic Authority and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So these people were fighting the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Who was he? Rishi Sunak. Well, by then he'd gone, of course, but he's the one who kicked it off, right? And UK Statistics Authority, of course, is the ONS. So Justice Holgate, as you saw here, he declares that it was lawful. So these people here lost the case, the pension schemes, and I'm gonna jump now to this article in the FT, and I've covered this before, and I covered this in 2022, and I thought, this is a default by the UK government because they promise investors to pay like interest based on RPI. And now all of a sudden from 2030, this interest is going to be based on CPI. So they changed the goalpost in the bond. When you change the goalpost, that is a technical default. So this came out, of course, 1st of September, the day of that ruling. UK government wins pension fund legal challenge over change to RPI. BT, Ford, and Marks and Spencer's pension schemes argued the new CPIH measure would leave pensioners worse off. So I'm going to skip to the end here. It says many investors, including pension funds, bought index-linked gilts, they're the linkers, in good faith and now face losses, wait for this, of 90 to 100 billion, said the spokesperson. This is a spokesperson for the pension schemes. This decision will leave millions of pensioners in defined benefit schemes with RPI-linked benefits poorer through no fault of their own and facing a substantial decreases in their year-on-year income. Women will be particularly impacted since they live longer and retire earlier. And so there you go. Wasn't the crisis in defined benefit pensions? Yes. So I want to go through this announcement, because they talk about how this could become a huge problem for the liability-driven investments, or LDI, which is a derivative that these pension schemes, pension funds had to use to make sure that their assets and liabilities matched. So it says here, the composition of RPI is set to change from February 2030. RPI index values will be calculated using the same methods and data that used to calculate the CPIH. This would likely result in RPI being lower by an average of 1% per annum. Pension schemes, in particular defined benefit schemes, are expected to be affected in two ways: a reduction in the value of any RPI-linked assets, and a reduction in any liabilities linked to RPI, for example, indexation and revaluation calculated on the basis of RPI. Given that many defined benefit pension schemes are invested in RPI-linked gilts, the proposed change could have a detrimental impact on the funding position of a number of schemes. A large number of pension schemes with CPI-linked liabilities will have RPI-linked assets. For these schemes, their funding position will be negatively affected as the value of their assets will fall while the level of their liabilities will not change. A chart, oh, that's the Justice Holgate. So he's one of the culprits, I would say, because he went along with the government. He said it was lawful to change basically default on UK linkers. And this is the other culprit, I would say. These are the two guys who really triggered, and of course, his boss was Boris Johnson. These guys triggered this crisis. And why do I say that? Why am I not blaming Liz Truss and Kwarteng? So now I want to talk about the way the market reacted back in 2022 to this decision by the the High Court of Justice in the UK, the Royal Court of Justice, I'm sorry. So you can see here that in the summer of 2022, let's say beginning of August, the 10-year yield was still relatively low. It was below 2%. And then it bottomed. And I would argue that people within the establishment, the judicial system, government, and the City of London knew something was up, that this judge was going to rule for the government in terms of the CPI versus RPI. And you can see that yields started picking up. It wasn't, well, I'll come to that in a minute, but you can see here that, yeah, it started picking up already. And even before September 1st, when that was announced, that default yields were already almost reaching 3%. So they started really racing ahead. Liz Truss was not prime minister. The mini budget, of course, hadn't been announced. And we get to the 1st of September. That was the date of when this court announcement was made that the government had acted lawfully in changing, basically defaulting on these linkers. And the 10-year yield made a high of almost 3%, 2.927, and then it kept going up. Yes, Liz Truss became prime minister on the 2nd, but the mini budget was only announced on the 22nd of September, and yes, yields did go up. But notice that before the mini budget, yields were already at almost 3.5%. So they went from, let's say, in the beginning of August, from 1.7, they basically doubled to 3.5% the day before the mini budget. And I would argue that it was Rishi Sunak and Justice Holgate who triggered this by the default of the linkers, which is such a huge part, of course, of the defined benefit pension system. And these pension funds also use these derivatives that leveraged everything, liability-driven investments. And I would say that, yes, maybe the mini budget did accentuate the crisis, but my my money is on Sunak and this justice triggering this crisis, because it was basically a default. What about the Bank of England? Yes, they came in and rescued. I would argue that the Bank of England was on the side of Rishi Sunak and this justice. And they did want to change also the statistics, because I've spoken about this, how in May of 2022, they had already changed the methodology for CPI, which was something that Sunak kicked off as well. Not just not just changing the RPI to CPI in the linkers, but also changing the way they calculated CPIH. So yes, why would the Bank of England be interested in tinkering with the inflation data? Well, because they're on the hook for high inflation. They don't want to raise rates as much as they should. And the other thing this methodology change in the CPIH did, and I've spoken about this, it changed the history of the CPI going back to 1949. And it also changed the CPI average from 2.7% from 1997 to 2020 to 1.9. And why was that significant? Well, because the Bank of England, the Bank of England had a target when it gained its independence in 1997 of keeping a CPI of 2% on average. And now with this new change, the average was 1.9 magically from 2.7. And it's interesting as well that Liz Truss a few weeks ago was in the US at a conservative uh, conference. And she said that the Bank of England basically didn't like what her and Kwarteng were doing. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Bank of England pushed uh, pushed the gilt market as well to the brink, and also push the pound to the brink versus the dollar, so that he could get rid of Truss and Kwarteng and basically blame this fiasco on them, while the blame should really be for Sunak and Johnson for uh, bringing these changes that completely defaulted on these defined benefit pensions through the changing the linkers from RPI to CPI, right? And the thing is, the Bank of England also benefits from this change in CPI methodology and change, for to the linkers, because it means they can keep rates lower. So that's how I see it. Yeah, the Bank of England was probably leaning on the side of Sunak, or not on the side of Truss and Kwarteng. And is it any wonder that Sunak was chosen to clean up the mess? I don't think there's a coincidence there. So it's interesting how, the press, they keep saying that it's the quasi-Kwarteng Truss crisis. They were to blame, but it's anything but, in my opinion. And talking about the press, I wanted to quickly go over this because I think this is really important, especially with what's gone on, not just with the guilt crisis and Liz Truss and Kwarteng, but what went on before that, during the crisis we had from 2020. There's a lot of things coming out that the government doesn't like. And I'm not going to go into detail about that, but I think this is a symptom here of tyranny, that the government is getting worried, not just the government, but the establishment. This would apply also to labor. They're getting worried that people are finding out the truth. And this is a symptom of currency collapse. This happened in the 1790s in France with the Reign of Terror. If you criticize the government, they chopped your head off with the guillotine. It happened in 1920s Germany after the war. It was total social political mayhem. So this has come out. Muslim groups that incite hatred to be banned as extremists by government. But it's not just Muslims. It's also what they consider far right groups, right? It says here, the community secretary will set out a new definition of nonviolent extremism. So I guess he's now a specialist in semantics. He's going to change the dictionary, right? Uh, which officials will use to identify and publish a list of Islamist and far-right groups. Why not far left? That's what I have to ask. But this is also quite, I'll show you here what I also found that is very concerning. Where is it? That I think is very dangerous here. Definition will not apply to mainstream discourse. So technically, they could say that what I'm talking about here, what I spoke about today, is not mainstream. So where does it stop? So I just wanted to put this out there. And this is just a symptom of a collapse of the currency, folks. And well, it's 8:32 a.m. So let's check the markets, and I've got my IG page here so we can look at it. And yes, it's going on for a bit, but of course you won't be hearing from me for about a week, maybe even more. So let's have a look here. Well, we got our favorite money here, gold. That's at 2170 roughly, down about $4. High's been 77, low is 67. Silver, of course, did very well yesterday. And why am I encouraged by what? No, don't want to place a deal. Uh, Oops, let's change this. What have I done? Uh, okay, back to silver. Why am I encouraged by the move in silver? Well, because of this chart here. I've been telling you guys in the last week or so that 2450 was a key level, and it's because of this line on the weekly chart, as you can see. And we had a really, really battled through this level. And yesterday we finally broke through it. Of course, it happened here and they knocked it back down. So it's still early days, but it's encouraging. So that's where silver is right now. You can see where the Dow futures is. They call it Wall Street, NASDAQ, S&P. The currencies as well are pretty steady. And one thing that I wanted to note, though, is high grade copper, which I cover every day. Uh, High grade copper is finally broken through $4, and that's very significant. And I think it's probably one of the reasons why silver is going up as well, because they're industrially related and also mine related. A lot of copper mines are also produce silver. So I think copper is looking really good. What about crude oil? Well, crude oil is approaching 80. That's WTI here, US crude oil, 79.50. It has been up to 79.89, and Brent is at 83.86. So there you go. I'm gonna, yeah, stop here and yeah, hopefully, as I said, I'll be back sometime late next week. Maybe I'll be ready for the Sunday live stream, not this Sunday, of course, but the Sunday after. Who knows? It all depends on how the surgery goes. Hopefully, it will go well. I was told that it's a routine surgery. It's going to be a keyhole surgery as well, which is a good thing. And yeah, I wish you yeah, great rest of the week, and hopefully we'll be talking soon. Take care. Bye.